We're very excited to have Peter here today as a expert or a well-regarded person in the independent school space who's worked with a lot of reputable schools across the US. So we're very excited to see what he's got in store for us today. And then obviously our own Matt Varley, who's going to be taking us through the findings of the State of Independent School Safety Report. I will put the link in the chat shortly as well to download the report, but you can download a digital copy of this report. It's a 50-page report that was commissioned by us at Orah in partnership with Atlas. And it kind of goes over 9 different dimensions of school safety that we asked the independent school community what they wanted to know, and then put those questions to them and find the answers. So without further ado, I will pass over to Matt to kick us off.
Thanks, Tiago, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining, and a big thanks to Peter for joining us as well. I'm looking forward to not only sharing the school safety report findings, but then a lot of questions that we've had from the report is like, how do we now actually operationalize this and bring some of this great research into my organization and make it happen? So super excited for the second part of this as well. Just checking you can see my screen, Tiago, and move to the next slide. Perfect. Thank you. Just a quick kind of 30 seconds on Orah. So Orah's in over 500 independent schools, including some of the best of the world, like the likes of Phillips Exeter, Crossroads, Ainsworth. And Orah answers the question of where is my student right now? So student movement obviously creates gaps throughout the day. So be it in the boarding house, an after school activity, an early dismissal, a hall pass, or even just period by period attendance. Orah collects the student's location either via the teacher or the student checking in to answer that question of where is the student right now, which is obviously super important when it comes to an emergency, either small or large, in being able to pinpoint where they are and then accounting for their safety. All right, that's enough about Orah. Let's dig into some of the findings that we collected from the school safety survey that we ran and how we came about that. So the research was conducted in consultation with Atlas, and we had an external party called True North conduct the research. So it was at arm's length from Orah, and we could go out into the K-12 independent school sector and understand truly what's going on with school safety. We did this research because we believe independent schools deserve that same rigor around safety data that you get from the likes of academics, enrollment, and fundraising that these reports typically come out. We wanted to commission this so we could share it wide with the sector. So around the number of responses, so 85 responses came in from US independent schools across multiple different stakeholders around school safety, operations, and IT leaders. We ran it earlier this year from that Feb to March period, and it covered a broad range of topics from governance decision-making to emergency preparedness, where schools are spending, where they're planning to spend, and really trying to get to the heart of the core issues when it comes to school safety and understanding where those students are. So jumping into the findings, and there's a lot more in the research report, as Tiago mentioned. I'll have a QR code at the end of this deck, but also no doubt there'll be a link put into the chat. Incidents are not theoretical. So I think there's a tendency in our sector to think that safety incidents is something that happens at other schools, larger schools, public schools, schools in different neighborhoods. But obviously that slide and that insight puts this to rest. 76% of independent schools experienced a safety incident in the last 12 months. So obviously 3 out of 4 schools in the survey. Obviously, no incidents the same. Most common was medical emergencies there at 54%. You think anaphylaxis on a field trip, concussion at practice, a student having a seizure in the dining hall. These are not edge cases and obviously something that you as schools deal with on a daily basis. 35% dealt with severe weather events. 19% had unauthorized people access their campus. And then obviously the major and most serious one here is obviously the lockdowns, and 1 in 5 schools experiencing a lockdown in that last 12-month period. So we're not just talking about the most severe in terms of a lockdown or that unauthorized campus access, but the myriad of different safety events that can occur on a daily basis. And I think since this report, we've also been talking about beyond a safety incident, just those day-to-day, I'm looking for this student and duty of care and being able to account for them is a critical part of what you do. What we found was emergency response was generally slow. 93% of schools are running drills regularly. The intent is there, the schools are practicing, but the outcome's only as good as what it produces. And when we asked how long it takes to confirm the safety of every student, the numbers really varied. So only 21% can do it under 4 minutes, 2% can do it under 2. And obviously, there's a scale here depending on how large the school is. Obviously, the more students, the longer it can take to account for them. And the report digs into that nuance and breaks that down even further. But I think the main thing here was what we found was a lot of the drills weren't even measured, and there was no kind of feedback loop at the end of an emergency lockdown. It was either still pen and paper. There was no real start and finish time, and whether that was improving over time to understand how the organization or the school could improve. So that whole measurement around emergency response was a key call out from this report. I mean, this slide's deceptively simple, but I mean, I think that it's probably one of the most important ones in my deck. So only 41% of schools are highly confident they know who is on campus at any given moment. Flipping that around, nearly 6 in 10 schools aren't sure. And this could range from students decided to skip class or they're in the bathroom, all the way up to that they've walked off campus without actually having permission to do. So if you think about a student's actual day, they arrive, maybe late, they go into class, they leave for a sports fixture, they come back, they visit the nurse, they get picked up early, or maybe they're a senior off campus with privileges and they signed out at lunch, but nobody signed them back in. There's all of these specific edge cases, which creates a moment where the school doesn't actually know where the student is. So every one of those transitions is a moment where that picture can break down. And the 41% only knowing was quite a sobering fact that came out of this research. So accounting for students, let's put some numbers on it. The average time it took for a school to account for all students in emergency 6.3, and 42% was longer than that. But when a student has an unexcused absence, so they just didn't show up, no parent call or explanation, it took over half of the schools to eventually confirm a student was safe. And that process is far too long, is what we found against the data. But on average, it takes 32 minutes. Half an hour is a long time when a student's not accounted for. It could be something minor. They've just gone to the bathroom, they're goofing around, or they could be in a state of distress, as we've found in some of our conversations where every school has a cohort of students that are on a watch list and are at risk of various different things. Not saying that every unexcused absence is a crisis, but most of the time a kid may have slept in. But the whole point of a safety system is it works for the one time that isn't routine and when we need to account for them. The welfare checks. So 44% cannot reliably confirm a missing student is safe within an hour of an explained absence. So similar to the last slide here, I think adding on to the last slide, the key thing here is 27% here were unsure of their own process. They're just left with this black hole of understanding what their process is for when a student doesn't turn up, what they actually need to do next. So what we found, school safety decisions don't happen in isolation. There's 4 forces that were pulling at every safety decision that we found in the report: board and leadership oversight, regulatory compliance, budget and resource constraints. But the interesting one that stood out to me was this balancing safety with school culture. And from the conversations that we've had, there's a real continuum. And it comes down to individual schools' culture and where they want to draw themselves on that continuum of Big Brother-esque sort of tracking all the way down to a student's kind of device, which is not something that Orah does, but there are schools that go to the nth degree of having very real-time location systems that's tracking physical hardware on students, through to a very kind of other end of the spectrum where there's no tracking in whatsoever. And I think that balance of where schools want to draw a line based on their culture, what the expectations are from parents, but also their local community, was a key call out on how far a school wants to go down to knowing where a student is. So wrapping up on a few of these key points, obviously the next slide will have a link to download the safety report. Download that. I know that was a quick whistle-stop tour on some of the findings. And what we've found is auditing a current school safety plan, if there is one in place, or even just going across some of those key location and areas within the school of understanding, do we actually know when a student is present in this location, is the next really tactical, tangible step. Really excited about this next part of our webinar as well, where we hear and learn from Peter in terms of how to operationalize within a school and take some of the findings from here and turn those into specific plans and actions within your school. So if I clicked through to the final slide, there's the QR code that I'll leave up for the next 20 odd seconds. No doubt, I can't see the chat, but no doubt there is a link to download it as well on the chat. But thank you once again for joining the webinar today. At this point, I'm going to stop the screen share and welcome Peter to the stage. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Matt. I'll share my screen here and fascinating stuff. I mean, I am completely taken by some of the data you have there, and it seems like there's a real opportunity to develop strategy as a result. And so today, what we're going to talk about is how do you actually do it? And for the purposes of me walking you through this, we're going to really focus at the kind of the strategic planning level, which I could see the pillar being on safety, right? Student well-being. This could probably emerge as one of the projects inside of a strategic plan, but I'm going to walk you through it. And then at the end, we're going to take I'm going to ask Matt to come back on, and we're going to walk you through one of the findings from the report and then think out loud, like how could we operationalize it? I'm going to talk to you about the school operating system. Before I do that, just a little bit about me. So my name is Peter Barron. I've been working with independent schools for well over 20 years. Before MoonshotOS, I spent a long time at the Enrollment Management Association, where I managed all the external parts of the organization, and have just done a lot of work with independent schools to really help them find successful pathways. Now I'm really focused with MoonshotOS on helping schools think through the financial model so that they're sustainable, not just for next year or 5 years down the road, but that they're building the right systems and strategy in order to be strong decades into the future so that we can serve more kids. Let me go ahead and just jump right in. I love this quote. If you've read James Clear, Atomic Habits, maybe you're familiar with it, but you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your system. So in the context of looking at the report that Matt just walked through, is like there are some really great goals in there. What I've experienced in my own career, and I certainly see this as I'm interviewing heads of school. And just so you know, I've interviewed probably close to 200 heads of school on the independent school business model. So I've got a lot of context. And one of the things that I've learned is that taking strategy and actually operationalizing it is really hard. Schools are trying to figure out the best ways to do that. And I think this quote here summarizes it well, which is if you don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And if you don't have those systems, it makes things really hard. And what I typically find is that most schools really don't have a hard time with planning and developing the strategy. But when it gets to how do we actually take that off the paper and make it happen on a day to day, that's where they really start to struggle. And if you don't have good execution underpinning your strategy, then ultimately what you've developed is just a document. It doesn't necessarily find its way into real life. Excuse me. But it makes sense why schools struggle with it. So if you just think about the typical strategic plan, you're probably going to have 4 to 5 priorities. In this use case, let's imagine 5. So it was probably something on academics, student well-being, faculty, innovation, and financial sustainability. Those are the general pillars that you see. So if you look at those 5, then typically you have 4 goals per priority. And then underneath those goals, you may have 6 different initiatives. So if you do the math, if you think about what a strategy is asking you to do, you potentially could have 120 new initiatives that a school has to complete over a 3 to 5 year time horizon. But that's on top of everything else that you do each day. So when you look at all the findings from the Orah report, the Orah and Atlas report, you realize, boy, like how do we fit this in with all the other things that we do every day, right? It's a really difficult thing to do. And it usually begs the question, where do I start? How do I actually take some of these really ambitious goals and make them happen on a daily basis? And so let's talk about operating systems. And my guess is everybody who's on this phone is very on this call is very familiar with operating systems. I mean, you're on a laptop right now, which has an operating system. You probably have a smartphone next to your laptop, which has an operating system. And when you think about what it is, really, at the end of the day, it's that infrastructure that makes sure everything works together, right? And it allows us to stay organized, efficient, and productive. But just as our phones rely on an operating system to function effectively, organizations need their own operating systems to align people, processes, and tools. And this is where the school operating system comes into play. Simple definition, it's the way school leaders organize all of its human energy and tech too. It's the way people meet. It's how we solve problems, plan, prioritize, follow, process. You can see all the different things on the screen here, right? These are all the kinds of those human connections that we have in order to take our strategy and then put it into life and make sure that we're propelling our organizations forward. But here's the thing. Your school already has an operating system. The question is whether it was designed with a purpose or on purpose. So, like I said, every school has one. So, really, at the end of the day, is it intentional or is it unintentional? And when you think about an unintentional operating system, it probably evolved without a plan. It may be driven by tradition or whoever's the loudest individual. And a really typical system, signal of a system that's not intentional is that you probably have silos, right? This office doesn't talk to that office, right? We're doing our thing because they don't know the right way to do it. Maybe you have unclear priorities or you have reactive decision making. I mean, I think everybody on this call probably has been part of an organization that falls prey to the shiny object syndrome. Oh, wow, this new thing, let's go pursue that and abandon everything else that we've done. Like these are all common challenges that schools face, and not just schools. I mean, organizations across all different industries deal with these things on a daily basis. Now, let's take a quick look, though, at what's an intentional operating system look like. It's deliberately designed, it aligns people, processes, and tools, and it creates clear priorities and shared accountability. But what does that actually look like within the context of a strategic plan? And again, we're going to fly the plane a little lower. We're going to apply it to one of the findings in the Orah report. But if you think about it from a strategic planning point of view, you most likely have a long-term vision. That's probably your 5 to 10 year North Star. Then you need a 3 year plan in order to be able to create the strategies to get to that long-term vision. But where it gets really important is how do you set up your annual goals, breaking that down into 90-day sprints so that you're making progress every 90 days towards your annual goals. But I will tell you this, the secret to organizations getting things done, it's how we meet. How do we actually come together and make sure that we're organized and making progress on our strategies? And so if you break it down a little bit more, if you think about your annual goals, here's the most important thing that I can teach you about developing your annual goals. When you're looking out at your strategy, your 3 year strategies, and think about your office, maybe maybe your department has some strategies that you're working towards. You probably have some big goals that you're trying to achieve. So, but you have to think through what do we need to do over the next 12 months? So, the question I always encourage schools to think about is as you're planning your goals, ask yourself this: what needs to be true over the next 12 months for us to achieve our 3 year strategies? And maybe you have 18-month strategies or 2 year strategies, whatever you have. But what needs to be true over the next 12 months for you to be able to achieve those strategies? And then my guess is you're probably going to come up with a whole bunch of things. You may very well may say, hey, here's 10, 15 goals that we want to pursue. The reality is you can't do that, right? You have to make choices. And part of strategy is making hard choices. And so really trying to organize your priorities around, are these high impact quick wins or are these high impact major bets? You want your priorities to fall into those two categories. Now, if anything doesn't fall into those categories, maybe they're thankless tasks or they're going to require a lot of energy but not have a lot of impact. Anything that falls into those categories, just push those to the side and don't do them right now. Now, they may be important down the line, but right now in the next 12 months, those things aren't important. What you really need to do is make difficult choices around things that fall into the high impact quick win category, the high impact major bet. And when you do that, then you're able to really focus in on the things that matter most. Even still, you have these annual goals, but they may still feel overwhelming. Like, how are we going to do this in the next 12 months? And this is where you then have to take the next step, which is to ask yourself the question, what needs to be true over the next 90 days for us to hit our annual priorities? And when you ask that question, then you're able to break it down and say, okay, what are some projects that we can do between now and over the next 90 days that will allow us to get closer to our annual goals? And who are the owners of these projects? What are the defined outcomes? Once you've done that, now all of a sudden you're in this cadence where you're taking these big annual goals and you're breaking it down into 90-day sprints and making it more manageable and achievable. And every 90 days you're coming back and you're saying, hey, how did we do over the last 90 days? Were we successful? Did we fall short? Did we overachieve? And then you're taking that data and you're planning for the next 90 days. And so you're building these projects quarter after quarter so that you can get to some of these big goals that you set for yourself and for your team over the year. Now, where it really becomes important is at the weekly leadership team meeting. So maybe you have a department meeting, maybe you sit on your school's leadership team, but this is where strategy comes alive. And I'll just use the example of a school's leadership team. If you look at all the people who are sitting around a school's leadership team and then think about the salaries that all of these folks make, that is literally the most expensive meeting that happens on your campus every single week. And so being very intentional about how we meet and how we drive strategy and how we deal with the daily fires is a critical component to a leadership team meeting. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm actually going to teach you a leadership team format that you can use either in your department meetings or at your leadership team level. And it breaks down into 7 steps. So imagine you have a 90-minute meeting. Now, if you have a 60-minute meeting, you would just adjust the numbers so that it fits within that time frame. But let's just go with 90 minutes for now. The first 5 minutes of your meeting is what we call the gather, which is where everybody around the table provides a personal or professional one. Hey, what's going on in your life? What's going on professionally? And that's meant to warm up the room. Now, headlines are where you share announcements. And this is really important because imagine at a leadership team, this is where you start to break down some of those silos, right? Everybody around the table is sharing what are the headlines relevant to their departments, which is important because one of the things that drives silos is people don't know what other people are doing within their departments. And now you're socializing that around the table. The next 5 minutes is that you're looking at the data that matters most. So you have a scorecard, like what are the metrics that you have to check? Now, this is really just a red, yellow, green exercise. Is the data on track? Is it off track? If you're finding that anything falls into the red zone, you're not going to talk about it then. You're actually going to add it to section 6, which is we call the list. So you're going to literally have a list of all the things that you want to talk about. If you need to talk about data, you're not talking about it in this 5 minutes. You're going to talk about it during the list section. Then you're going into your project. So these are those 90-day sprints that I just spent a couple minutes talking about. Again, this is really a moment to say, are we on track or off track? And this is where you're doing that pulse check on strategy every single week. Now, if something is off track, then you're going to have a conversation about it. But it happens during the list section of the meeting, which is that 60-minute window. Then the next 5 minutes, you talk about tasks. So inevitably, coming out of past meetings, there were tasks that were assigned to members of the team. Hey, Peter, you need to do this thing. Did you get it done? It was due today. I didn't because of this, that, and the next thing. Okay, great. No judgment. We're going to have a conversation during the list section and figure out how do we solve for that? Whatever friction you're experiencing, how can we remove that friction? Or it could be as simple as, hey, I'm going to get it done by next week. You just change the due date. Then you get into the list. This is where you really get into the bulk of your meeting. And my guess is you could easily have 30 different things that you need to talk about that are on that list. There's no way that you're ever going to be able to get through 30 things. In fact, no team is able to process 30 things in a short amount of time. So this is where you have to make some choices. You actually have to take a second, go through all the items on the list, and then prioritize what do we absolutely have to talk about today. And then you work through them and you process each item on that list. Now, let's say you get through 7 of the 30. That means you have 23 things you didn't get to. That's fine. Guess what? Those things are going to be there next week when you come back. And when you do the prioritization exercise next week, maybe some of those 23 rise to the top. So it's this constant reflection of around what do we need to do? What's most important to our strategy? What are the daily things that we have to take care of? And you're processing it in a very structured way. Then you get to the last 7 minutes of the meeting, which is what we call the wrap. So basically, you're recapping actions. Hey, Peter, you've got this to do. You all set with that? Yep, good to go. Great. But then you literally go around the room to everybody who's sitting around the table and say, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, let's rate this meeting. And then one being, this was the worst meeting that I've ever had, 10 being, this is the most amazing meeting that I've ever had. And the reason you do that is because it creates trust and accountability across the table. And like I said before, everybody sitting around that table, and you think about salaries and what the school's investing in that meeting, it's the most expensive meeting at the school. You want to make sure that's being managed well. And when you're rating these meetings, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, great, we scored an 8. Awesome. This was a really successful meeting. But if you scored a 5.5, then you're going to have to address that. And so you're going to put an item on the list, and then you can have a conversation about how can we improve the following week. And what it does is it creates this virtuous cycle where every week you're reflecting and you're getting a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And if the meeting is improving, that means then that your strategy is getting executed, you're managing daily demands, you're working towards your annual goals, you're getting closer to your 3-year strategies, and you're getting closer to whatever that 10-year vision is for the school. And so this is why weekly meetings are so important, because this is the pulse check that you have every single week around how are we performing and are we achieving our priorities and strategies. And so I use this platform. If you want to use it, feel free. It's called 90.io. They have nonprofit pricing. You can ask them for it. But this manages everything inside of the operating system, from your scorecard to your projects, to your annual goals, to your to-dos, to your issues list and your meetings. It's really the glue that holds it all together. Now, what changes when you have a really sound operating system? You go from priorities that drift throughout the year to annual goals that anchor every decision. Meetings without a system, meetings are probably updates, and my guess is decision making is really tough versus a school intentional school operating system where you're producing decisions and you have clear action items. Projects that stall without accountability. Every project has an owner and a deadline. The head carries execution alone versus the team shares ownership of strategy. The strategic plan lives on a shelf versus the strategy lives in the weekly meeting. And so these are the core components of a school operating system. You can then see, like, I literally run this system with individual office. So you can actually see how this could go down to an individual office and could be very helpful for them to execute. Now, Matt, I'm going to ask you to come back on. And this is one of the examples, I believe, from the report where it's that 32-minute windows for schools to account who is marked as an unexcused absence. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
On average, yep.
So my guess is for a school, this is something that they want to correct. So the question is, how do you go about doing that? And I guess for you, Matt, I'm going to ask you, or anybody on the webinar, if they want to chime in via the chat function, what needs to be true over the next 12 months for you to be able, for a school to be able to close that window? What would be the goal set around that?
Yeah, what needs to be true over the next 12 months? I mean, obviously visibility, better visibility into where they were last kind of seen, or their sort of current last location. It's a data thing in sort of real-time nature.
Yeah.
As I think through that, it's a combination of not only technology present, but it's also a culture change of people, not only people within the school, but also parents updating, if they're absent for the day, updating it in a system or giving the school a call. Yeah.
So thinking about it at a 12-month level, I'm just going to repeat what I think I heard. So correct me if I'm wrong. What needs to be true over the next 12 months is that the school needs to, one, make sure you have the right technology platform in place in order to track this information it's reliably. Two, make sure that the data that is being tracked is surfaced to the right people at the right time. And three, building culture around why this is important, both at the faculty and staff level and the parent and student level as well.
Yeah.
So that's a big goal, right? There's a lot that you would need to unpack in that. So then if you're sitting there working with the school, then you have to think through, all right, that's where we want to be in 12 months. But for us to get there, we've got to now reverse engineer it. And the first place that we would want to reverse engineer it to is, hey, what needs to be true over the next 90 days for us to get to be closer to achieving our goal? So it could be, hey, we need to do a survey with our families, or around safety and culture. We need to begin to investigate different technology stacks to be able to figure out how do we track this data reliably. Maybe it's we already have the technology, so we need to make sure that we're doing the right professional development with our teachers. And so you can begin to see, okay, here's some individual projects that are going to help us inch closer to it. And I think for me, that's the thing that's most important with any trying to achieve any goal is that when you look at it at the top level, it can feel really intimidating. But as you begin to break it down and start to plan out the work, if you think about it through these 90-day windows, all of a sudden it feels a little more manageable and achievable versus just trying to look at it as solely at the annual goal level. So go ahead. Yeah.
No, makes sense. Yeah, I like it.
And so I'll just leave you with this. So this is a head of school in Vail, and they very successfully run an operating system. And if you know your head of school, one of the things that the heads have a hard time doing is sleeping because there's just a lot going on. And the fact that he can now sleep at night and not worry about things getting done is just a big endorsement for why running some version of an operating system that's intentional can really change how a school functions. So I'll leave it there.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but just for anyone here who wants to maybe reach out to you or have you work with them in their school, how can people get in contact with you?
Yeah, I saw in the chat you put my website, so you can go to my website and you can go to my contact page, and there's a couple ways to reach out to me there. But the easiest way is just to email me. My email is peter@moonshotos.com. I'm always happy to reply.
Cool. I think that kind of brings us to the end of the webinar. I appreciate everyone who's joined us today, and obviously I very much appreciate you joining us, Peter. That was very insightful. I got a lot of insights out of it myself. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Peter.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.